Chapter 1. The Rust and the Rot. The old Ford groaned up the gravel path, its engine complaining like a dying man. Jane's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, a stark contrast to the grime caked beneath her fingernails. She wanted this. She needed this. The silence, the isolation, the sweet, rotting peace of a place left behind by time. This whole journey was necessary, because staying in that pristine apartment, with its ghost-like echoes of laughter and broken promises, was simply not an option. Mark's betrayal wasn't just a crack in her world, it was a sinkhole that had swallowed everything whole, especially after he chose her. Chloe, her best friend. A final shudder, and the car died. Home. Her grandmother's cabin sagged into the earth, a weary sigh of timber and stone. Moss crept up the northern wall in a slow green conquest. The air hung thick, so heavy with the scent of pine needles and damp soil that it felt like breathing in the forest itself. It was a world away from the city's sterile perfume and exhaust fumes. It was perfect. She wanted to forget everything. She wanted to disappear into the woods. She wanted to become as numb as the splintered wood of the porch railing. Consequently, she left her bags in the car, needing to face the decay head-on first. The key, a piece of rusted metal, felt ancient in her palm. It scraped in the lock, the sound loud in the oppressive quiet. The door swung inward on a long, drawn-out screech, releasing a puff of air that smelled of dust, mice, and forgotten memories. Inside, shadows clung to the corners like shy creatures. Motes of dust danced in the single beam of afternoon light slanting through a grimy window, a silent, swirling galaxy of neglect. A thick film covered every surface, and a single rocking chair sat facing the cold, black maw of the fireplace. Why had her grandmother never sold this place? What secrets was she letting rot up here in the mountains? As the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in angry strokes of orange and purple, a profound loneliness began to seep into Jane's bones. This was different from the sharp, stabbing pain of betrayal. This was an older, deeper ache, an emptiness that the sprawling wilderness outside seemed to magnify rather than fill. She dragged her suitcase inside, the wheels rumbling over the uneven floorboards. She didn't bother to unpack. What was the point? She just needed a place to hide, a place where no one could find the broken pieces of her. The solitude she craved was a double-edged sword, because it gave her nothing to do but remember. Remember Mark's easy smile turning cold. Remember Chloe's tearful, pathetic excuses. Later, huddled under a musty quilt, Jane listened to the world outside transform. The gentle rustle of leaves became the scratching of claws. The wind's soft whisper twisted into something that sounded like a mournful cry. Every creak of the old cabin was a footstep. Every tap on the window pane a phantom's knock. She told herself it was just her imagination, a mind raw and frayed from emotional exhaustion. She was safe here, wasn't she? What could possibly happen in the middle of nowhere? Then came the howl. It wasn't distant. It wasn't the lonely call of some far-off coyote. No, this was close. So close the sound vibrated through the floorboards and up her spine. It was a deep, guttural cry that ripped through the night, a sound of raw power, of pure dominance. It wasn't a plea to the moon, it was a declaration, a claim. This forest, this night, this very air she was breathing, belonged to him, and she was trespassing. Chapter 2. Whispers in the General Store. The morning light felt like an apology for the night's terror. Sunlight streamed through the dirty windows, making the cabin seem less like a tomb and more like a simple, neglected shack. Jane's fear had hardened overnight into a brittle shell of defiance. A wolf? So what? This was her land now, her sanctuary. She refused to be chased away by a stray animal, no matter how big it sounded. Her immediate goal was simple: coffee, food, and a semblance of normalcy. Survival, she reasoned, was the best form of revenge because it required her to focus on something other than her shattered heart. Driving into the nearby town of Silverwood Creek felt like traveling back in time 50 years. It was a single street with a handful of weathered storefronts. The general store, with its faded sign and cluttered porch, looked like the town's beating heart. Inside, the air smelled of coffee beans, sawdust, and something sweet like cinnamon. An old woman with a cloud of white hair and eyes that missed nothing watched her from behind the counter. "You must be Maeve's girl," the woman said, her voice raspy but kind. "Jane, right? I'm Martha. Heard you were coming up to the old cabin." The casual way she knew everything was unsettling. "Just for the summer," Jane replied, forcing a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "Needed a break from everything." Martha just hummed, a low, knowing sound. She began ringing up the coffee and bread Jane had placed on the counter. "This forest has a way of giving people what they need, just not always what they want. It's got old magic in its roots. You be careful wandering around you here, especially after dark." Jane gave a short, humorless laugh. "Don't worry. I think I heard the welcoming committee last night. Big dog." Martha's movements stilled. She leaned forward, her friendly demeanor vanishing like a puff of smoke, replaced by a grave seriousness. "That's no dog, honey. That's him. The alpha. Hasn't been a soul brave enough or stupid enough to stay in that cabin for more than a night in 20 years. Not since—" She trailed off, her gaze distant. "Not since what?" Jane prompted, her curiosity overriding her skepticism. "Not since the last one," Martha whispered, her voice dropping so low Jane had to lean in. "The last woman he tried to— well, they say he's cursed. His family line, all the way back. A curse born of blood and betrayal. The alpha of these woods is fated to find his one true mate. But the moment he claims her, the moment he marks her as his, the curse twists their bond into a poison. It destroys her, drives her mad, and then she dies." A cold chill, entirely unrelated to the morning air, snaked down Jane's spine. It was a ridiculous ghost story, the kind of local legend used to scare tourists. It had to be. Yet, the conviction in Martha's eyes was absolute. "That's a horrible story." "It's a horrible truth," Martha corrected softly. "He keeps to himself, protects this forest like a king in his castle. But he's a tragic figure, a monster who wants nothing more than to love, but is destined only to destroy it. So he stays alone. He rejects everyone. They say his rage is a terrifying thing, but his loneliness, they say that's what's truly dangerous." Jane paid for her things, her mind reeling. She wanted to dismiss it, to laugh it off as backwoods superstition. But the memory of that howl, the raw, possessive power in it, suddenly felt different, darker. As she stepped out of the store and into the bright sunlight, a strange feeling washed over her. The unnerving sensation of being watched. Her head snapped toward the tree line at the edge of town. For just a second, a fleeting, impossible heartbeat, she saw him. A tall, broad-shouldered figure standing in the deep shadows between two ancient pines. A silhouette of a man who was more predator than human. Then he was gone. Chapter 3. A Savage Kind of Mercy. It was a trick of the light, a figment of her overactive, sleep-deprived imagination. Jane repeated the words like a mantra as she stomped away from the cabin, her hiking boots crunching on fallen leaves. She was not going to be a prisoner to ghost stories and shadows. She was here to heal, and she couldn't do that if she was afraid of the very woods meant to be her sanctuary. So, she decided to conquer the fear. She would walk until her legs ached, until the memory of Martha's words and the phantom in the trees was sweated out of her system. It was a foolish, reckless decision, born from a desperate need to feel in control of something. The forest was deceptively beautiful. Sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, dappling the ground in shifting patterns of gold. A gentle breeze whispered through the leaves, carrying the earthy scent of moss and ferns. For a while, it worked. The rhythm of her steps and the sheer overwhelming life of the woods soothed the frantic edges of her mind. She pushed deeper, ignoring the faint trail she had been following, drawn by the sound of a distant stream. The change was subtle at first. The cheerful chatter of birds faded into an abrupt, unnatural silence. The air grew still and heavy, the temperature dropping several degrees. A primal instinct, buried deep beneath layers of civilized life, screamed at her, "Wrong! Turn back! Danger!" But her pride, that stubborn, wounded part of her, refused to listen. That's when she saw them. They emerged from the dense undergrowth like gray ghosts, silent and swift. 3 of them. Wolves. But these were not like any wolves she had seen in documentaries. They were enormous, their shoulders rippling with muscle, their fur a matted mix of gray and black. And their eyes were not those of simple animals. They burned with a cold, hungry intelligence. They were flanking her, cutting off her escape, their movements a coordinated predatory dance. A low growl rumbled from the largest one, its lips peeling back to reveal long, yellowed fangs. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Jane's throat. She was going to die out here, torn apart and forgotten. A twig snapped behind her, a sound so insignificant, yet it made the wolves freeze. The lead wolf's head shot up, its ears flattened against its skull. A different growl echoed through the clearing, a sound so deep and resonant it felt like the earth itself was vibrating in anger. He exploded from the trees. Jane could barely process what she was seeing. He wasn't a man, not entirely. He moved with a speed and ferocity that was utterly inhuman. He was a blur of savage, controlled violence. He hit the lead wolf like a freight train, a sickening crunch echoing as they collided. There was no hesitation, no wasted motion. A flash of a powerful arm, the glint of what looked like claws, a blur of shadow and fury. He dispatched the other 2 with a brutal efficiency that was both horrifying and breathtaking. It was over in seconds. Silence descended once more, thick with the coppery smell of blood. The man, the alpha, straightened to his full, imposing height. He was massive, dressed in dark, worn clothing, his face obscured by shadows and a mane of untamed black hair. He turned his head slowly, and Jane felt his gaze land on her like a physical weight. His eyes. They glowed with a faint amber light, like embers in the darkness. They were the eyes of a predator. And in them, she saw a flicker of something she couldn't name. It wasn't anger. It wasn't triumph. It was recognition. A deep, soul-shaking familiarity, as if he had known her for 1,000 years. The sight of him didn't quell her fear, it transformed it into something sharper, more complex. He took a half-step toward her, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. "Leave this forest," he commanded. His voice was a raw, gravelly sound filled with a tightly coiled fury that was clearly directed as much at himself as it was at her. Jane could only stare, her heart hammering against her ribs. She finally stumbled backward, breaking the terrifying spell of his gaze, and ran. She didn't stop running until the splintered door of her grandmother's cabin was slammed shut behind her, the bolt thrown home. She collapsed against it, trembling, gasping for air. Her body shook with the aftermath of terror, but her mind was fixated on one impossible thing. It wasn't the violence. It wasn't the fear. It was his scent. Pine and rain, and something wild and musky that had already soaked into her clothes, branding her with his presence. Chapter 4. The scent of a target's sleep offered no escape. It was a dark, restless sea, and Jane was tossed on waves of glowing amber eyes and the memory of a savage growl. She woke with a gasp, the scent of pine and storm still clinging to her, a phantom presence in the small, dusty bedroom. It was insane. She had to leave. Her plan to find peace had backfired spectacularly, dropping her into the middle of a Grimm's fairy tale. She would pack her bags, abandon the cabin, and just drive. Drive until the mountains were a faint line in her rearview mirror. That was the only logical choice. She was stuffing clothes haphazardly into her suitcase when the floorboards on the porch creaked. It wasn't a gentle sound. It was the deliberate, heavy tread of more than one person. Jane froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Her mind raced. It couldn't be him. The Alpha. His movements had been silent, fluid. This was clumsy, human. A fresh wave of fear, different and somehow dirtier, washed over her. She crept to the window, peering through a gap in the grimy curtains. Two men stood on her porch. They were dressed in dark, practical clothing, their faces hard and unfamiliar. They weren't locals. They scanned the area with a predatory stillness that made her blood run cold. One of them looked at the other and smirked. "Definitely here. I can smell the city stink on her, trying to hide under all this pine." He took a deep breath, his nostrils flaring. And something else. She smells like him. Before Jane could scream, the cabin door splintered inward, torn from its hinges. She stumbled back with a cry, her frantic escape plan dissolving into pure terror. The men filled the doorway, their eyes cold and flat. They weren't just men. There was something off about them, an undercurrent of contained violence that felt chillingly familiar. They moved with the same predatory grace as the wolves from yesterday. "The Alpha has been busy," the first man purred, his gaze sweeping over Jane with possessive hunger. "Our leader is going to be very interested to meet his new pet." He lunged. Jane scrambled backward, her hands searching for a weapon, for anything. But before he could reach her, a shadow darkened the ruined doorway. A blur of motion. Kale. He was there, a figure of pure, undiluted rage. His eyes were blazing gold, and a low snarl ripped from his chest, a sound that shook the very foundations of the cabin. He moved with impossible speed, his attack a whirlwind of brutal force. It wasn't a fight, it was an execution. The sounds were sickening, the wet crunch of bone, a choked-off scream, the thud of bodies hitting the floor. It was over in an instant. Kyle stood over the broken forms of the two men, his chest heaving. Blood dripped from his hands. He turned his furious, glowing eyes on her. "What have you done?" he snarled, his voice a terrifying rumble. "You've brought them right to my door." He stalked toward her, and Jane pressed herself against the wall, trembling. He was magnificent and horrifying. He grabbed her arm, his fingers like steel bands. "You can't stay here. You've made this place a target." His touch was like a lightning strike. A jolt of pure energy shot up her arm straight to her heart. The world tilted, and her mind was flooded with a dizzying rush of sensation, possessiveness, fury, a desperate, aching need. It wasn't just her own emotion, it was his. And in that blinding flash of connection, a single impossible truth bloomed in her mind with absolute certainty. He was her fated mate. Chapter 5. A Cruel Kindness. He dragged her through the forest, his grip on her arm unrelenting. The world was a green and brown blur. Jane stumbled to keep up, her mind still reeling from the violent clash in the cabin and the electric, world-altering shock of their connection. He didn't speak, radiating a silent fury that was more intimidating than any shout. He led her to a place hidden from any path, a cabin much larger and sturdier than her grandmother's, built from massive, dark timbers. It looked like a fortress. Inside, the air was clean, smelling of cedar, wood smoke, and him. A fire burned low in a huge stone hearth. He finally released her, shoving her away as if her touch had burned him. He paced before the fire like a caged animal, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "They were shifters," Jane whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Like you." He stopped, his back to her. "Scouts from a rival pack. They've been sniffing around my borders for months. They want my territory. And now, thanks to you, they think they've found a weakness." He finally turned, his amber eyes piercing her. "They think you're my mate." Jane's breath hitched. "I am, aren't I?" The question was a fragile thing, full of a terrifying nascent hope. His expression hardened into a cruel, impenetrable mask. No. The word was a whip crack in the quiet room. The fates may have chosen you, but I will not have you. I reject the bond. I reject you. Each word was a physical blow. A hot, searing pain erupted in her chest, a phantom agony that mirrored the anguish twisting his features. The bond, this new, fragile thing inside her, was screaming in protest. She could feel his pain as if it were her own, a vortex of self-loathing and despair. He was hurting himself just as much as he was hurting her. She hated his logic. She hated his cruelty. But most of all, she hated the part of her that understood why he was doing it. The curse, she breathed, remembering Martha's story. It's real. As real as the blood on my hands, he bit out. I am a poison to my mate, a walking plague. My love is a death sentence, and I will not be your executioner. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a low, intense growl. I am doing this to save your life. You need to understand that the pain of this rejection is nothing, compared to what the curse would do to you. It would rot you from the inside out, turn your mind to ash, and leave you a hollow, screaming shell. Is that what you want? Tears of anger and devastation welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not show this man weakness. She would not be his tragic victim. So you're just going to throw me back to those things out there? The ones who think I'm your weakness? They will be dealt with, he said, his voice flat and final. And you will leave. First light, you get in your car and you drive away from this mountain and never look back. Forget you ever met me. Forget any of this ever happened. He was giving her an out. He was giving her her life back. It was a kindness, she knew, but it was the cruelest kindness she had ever known. Every instinct, every cell in her body screamed at her to stay, to fight for this impossible connection. But her mind, her scarred and broken heart that knew all too well the pain of being unwanted, agreed with him. She lifted her chin, her voice trembling only slightly. Fine. I don't belong to you. I don't belong to anyone. But as she turned away from him, she felt the phantom touch of his hand on her arm, and a deep, traitorous craving echoed through her soul. Chapter 6. A Cage of Safety. Jane spent the night on a leather couch that was too far from the fire. Sleep was a distant shore she couldn't reach. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the phantom agony of the rejected bond, a dull, persistent ache in the center of her soul. It was a constant reminder of Cale's presence in the room above, a silent, brooding storm of a man who was both her fated partner and her adamant enemy. He was right. She knew he was right. Leaving was the only sane thing to do. So why did the thought of driving away feel like tearing off a limb? Morning came, gray and sullen. A thick fog pressed against the windows, swallowing the forest whole. It felt like a bad omen. Kyle came downstairs, moving with a tense silence. He placed a mug of coffee on the table in front of her without a word. The gesture of simple civility felt strangely intimate, and it made the ache in her chest sharpen. The fog is too thick, he said, his voice a low rumble. They could be hiding anywhere. You'll wait until it clears. It was not a suggestion. Frustration boiled over inside her. So I'm your prisoner now? I thought you couldn't wait to get rid of me? I can't, he shot back, his golden eyes flashing with irritation. But I won't have your death on my conscience because I let you walk into an ambush. You are my responsibility until you are safely off this mountain. He said the word responsibility like it was a curse. Hours passed in suffocating silence. The fog refused to yield. Jane felt trapped, a mouse in a lion's den, every nerve ending hypersensitive to his presence. She could feel him watching her even when his back was turned. She was acutely aware of the raw power coiled in his frame, the way he moved with a predator's contained energy. She found herself wanting to know everything about him, the story behind the faint scars on his knuckles, the reason for the profound sadness that clung to him like a shroud. The attack came without warning, a crash of glass from the back of the cabin, a guttural roar of challenge from outside. Cale was moving before the sound had fully registered, a dark blur of motion. He shoved Jane behind him, his body a solid wall. "Stay down," he commanded. 3 shifters, different from the ones before, stormed into the room. They were larger, more feral. A brutal, chaotic fight erupted. It was a whirlwind of claws and teeth, of snarls and the sickening impact of fists on flesh. Cale fought like a demon, a force of nature unleashed. But he was outnumbered. One of the shifters broke past his guard, its eyes locked on Jane. It lunged for her. Cale roared, a sound of pure protective fury. He threw himself in front of Jane, taking the full force of the shifter's claws across his back. He grunted in pain, a deep animalistic sound. Jane screamed as she felt a bolt of white-hot agony lance through her own back, a perfect ghostly echo of his wound. The bond, strained and rejected, flared between them, transmitting his pain directly to her. The shock of it sent her stumbling to her knees. Kyle, fueled by a fresh wave of rage, dispatched the remaining attackers with a final, devastating series of blows. Silence fell, broken only by his ragged breaths and her horrified gasps. He turned slowly, his back a mess of deep, bleeding gashes. He saw her on the floor, her face pale, her hand pressed to her own back. He saw the understanding in her eyes. She had felt it. "You see," he rasped, his voice raw with pain and despair. "The connection, it's already started. This is what I was trying to protect you from." He swayed on his feet, the loss of blood making him unsteady. All thoughts of leaving vanished from Jane's mind. There was only the overwhelming, instinctual need to help him. "You're hurt," she said, her voice shaking. He looked around the trashed room, at the broken windows, and then at her, his expression grim and final. "They know where you are. They know you're connected to me. Going back to your grandmother's cabin is a death sentence." He pinned her with a gaze that left no room for argument. "You're not safe anywhere else. You stay here. With me." The summer escape she had dreamed of was officially over. She was now a captive, locked in a cage of his protection. Chapter 7. The Gilded Cage. The fortress Cale called home was a study in contradictions. It was rustic, built of dark, masculine timbers and rough-hewn stone, yet it was meticulously clean. The air smelled of cedar and leather, a stark contrast to the decay of her grandmother's cabin. Sunlight poured through large, reinforced windows, illuminating a space that felt both like a sanctuary and a prison. There was an undeniable sense of safety within these walls, a feeling that the snarling dangers of the forest could not penetrate. But with that safety came a suffocating sense of confinement. Jane felt like a bird in a gilded cage, protected from the hawk but unable to fly. Cale returned from a patrol of the perimeter, his presence filling the large main room, making the air crackle with a tense energy. He had shed his torn shirt, and his broad, scarred back was a testament to the brutal fight he had survived. He moved with a stiff, pained grace, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. "There are rules," he stated, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. He didn't look at her, focusing instead on cleaning a wicked-looking hunting knife. "You do not leave this cabin, for any reason. You don't go near the windows after sunset, and if you hear anything outside, you don't open the door." Jane bristled at his tone, the words a spark on the dry tinder of her frayed nerves. "So I'm your prisoner?" It wasn't a question. He finally looked at her then, his amber eyes hard and unyielding. "You are my responsibility. There is a difference." "Not from where I'm standing," she shot back, crossing her arms over her chest. "You drag me here against my will, lock me up, and give me orders. That sounds a lot like being a prisoner." She needed to push, to fight for some sliver of the autonomy she had lost. The life she had run from may have been built on lies, but at least it had been hers. A muscle feathered in his jaw. "I am keeping you alive," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Those shifters will be back. They tasted the connection between us, and now they see you as a pawn to use against me. Your only chance of survival is to stay within these walls, and to do exactly as I say." The logic was infuriatingly sound. She hated that he was right. She hated the helpless position she was in. But more than anything, she hated the terrifying, undeniable truth that her life now depended entirely on this brooding, dangerous stranger. This man who had rejected her soul, but now claimed ownership of her safety. Needing to escape his suffocating presence, she turned and began to explore the cabin's upper floor, her footsteps echoing in the tense silence. The rooms were sparse, functional. A bedroom that was clearly his, dominated by a large unmade bed, another empty guest room, but at the end of the hall was a single, heavy oak door that was locked. It was different from the others, older, with strange, swirling patterns carved into the wood. As Jane reached for the cold iron handle, a faint, inexplicable hum vibrated against her palm. It felt like a warning. A deep, resonant sadness seemed to emanate from the other side, a silent, ghostly sorrow that called to a place deep inside her. What was he hiding in there? The question lodged in her mind, a new and unsettling mystery in a home already full of secrets. Chapter 8. A balm for the wound. Later that afternoon, Jane found the first aid kit in the bathroom. It was well-stocked, military grade. She walked back into the main room where Cale was staring into the fire, his back still a raw, angry map of deep gashes. The wounds were already starting to knit together, the skin pulling tight in a way that was unnervingly fast, but they were still open, still bleeding sluggishly. He was a creature of incredible power and resilience, yet at this moment he looked vulnerable. "You need to clean those," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "They'll get infected." He didn't turn. "I heal fast." The words were a dismissal, a wall erected between them. "Not fast enough," she insisted, walking closer until she stood directly behind him. "Sit down, or I'll follow you around with this antiseptic until you give in." The threat was ridiculous, but it was all she had. For a long moment, he remained perfectly still. Jane held her breath, expecting him to snarl at her, to command her to leave him be. Instead, with a low, weary sigh, he slowly lowered himself into a wooden chair. The silent surrender was more shocking than any argument would have been. Her heart gave a strange, uneven flutter. She knelt behind him, her hands trembling slightly as she uncapped a bottle of antiseptic. "This is probably going to sting," she murmured. As she gently dabbed at the edges of the deepest wound, his entire body went rigid. A low, pained hiss escaped his lips. His skin was hot beneath her fingertips, a furnace of supernatural energy. The proximity was dizzying. She was so close she could smell the scent of his skin beneath the metallic tang of blood, a heady mix of earth, pine, and pure, undiluted male. Her fingers brushed against uninjured skin, and she felt the jolt of their bond, a low electric hum that made the hairs on her arms stand up. They worked in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the soft dab of cotton on skin. The tension in the air was thick, a living thing. It was a fragile truce, a temporary suspension of their strange, antagonistic relationship. "Why are you doing this?" he finally asked, his voice a rough growl. Jane paused, her hand hovering over his shoulder. She could give him a simple answer, "Because it's the right thing to do." But it wasn't the truth. Not the whole truth, anyway. "Because when that shifter's claws hit you," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper, "I felt it, a shadow of it, and I never want to feel that again." He didn't respond, but she saw the muscles in his shoulders tighten. She had acknowledged the bond, the unwanted connection that flowed between them, and he couldn't deny its reality. As she finished cleaning the last wound, her fingers lingered for a fraction of a second on his warm skin. He didn't pull away. He simply sat there, his head bowed. In that quiet, unguarded moment, she saw past the alpha, past the monster and the savior. She saw a man drowning in a loneliness so profound it was like a physical presence in the room. Then, just as quickly, the wall slammed back into place. He stood up abruptly, pulling away from her touch, the moment of vulnerability gone as if it had never been. But she had seen it, and it was a sight she knew she would not be able to forget. Chapter 9. Poison in the Ear. Cale left at dusk, melting into the shadows to patrol his territory. "Stay inside, bolt the door," was all he said, the command a familiar, grating refrain. Jane did as she was told, the heavy thud of the iron bolt echoing the feeling of her own entrapment. The silence he left behind was heavy, filled with the unspoken things that lay between them. The rejection, the bond, the fleeting moment of connection. A sharp knock on the door an hour later nearly made her jump out of her skin. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Kyle? No, he wouldn't knock. It had to be them. The rival shifters. She backed away from the door, her eyes searching for a weapon. "Jane, it's Liam. I'm Cale's beta." The voice from the other side was calm, reasonable. Nothing like the feral growls of the attackers. "Cale sent me to check on you. Please open the door." Hesitantly, Jane crept forward and peered through the small peephole. A man stood on the porch, his features open and handsome in the porch light. He had a kind smile and warm, intelligent eyes. He looked normal, safe. Cautiously, she drew back the bolt and opened the door a crack. "Sorry to frighten you," Liam said, his smile gentle. "Cale can be a bit intense. He worries. We all do." "He didn't mention anyone was coming," Jane said, her hand still gripping the edge of the door. "That's Cale for you. Doesn't believe in sharing the burden," Liam replied with an easygoing shrug. "May I come in? It's not safe to talk out here." Against her better judgment, she let him in. He moved with a quiet confidence, his presence far less overwhelming than Cale's. He looked around the cabin with a familiar air. "He's taken a great risk, bringing you here," Liam said, his tone turning serious. "He's painted a target on his own back, on all of our backs." "I didn't ask for any of this," Jane retorted defensively. "I know," Liam said, his expression full of sympathy. It was a stark contrast to Cale's constant, simmering anger. "You're just caught in the middle. That's why I came." "Cale, he's not going to tell you the whole truth because he thinks he's protecting you. But you deserve to know what you're up against. You deserve to know what he is." A knot of dread tightened in Jane's stomach. "I know about the curse." Liam's face fell, a look of profound pity washing over him. "You know the story, but you don't know the reality. I do. I was here for the last one. Her name was Alara." He spoke the name like a prayer and a curse. She was his mate. The fates brought them together just like they brought you to him. And he loved her. Gods, he loved her more than life itself. He thought he could beat the curse. He thought their love was strong enough. Liam's voice dropped to a conspiratorial, sorrowful whisper. "He was wrong. I watched it happen. I watched the curse take root in her. It twisted her mind, filled her with paranoia and fear. She became a shadow of herself. And in the end..." He looked Jane directly in the eye, his own gaze filled with a haunted pain. "In the end, she begged him to kill her, to end her suffering. And he did." The air rushed out of Jane's lungs. The room seemed to tilt, Martha's vague story now a horrifying, concrete reality. He killed her? "He destroyed her," Liam corrected softly, his voice laced with an undeniable bitterness. "He doesn't mean to be a monster, Jane. But with him, love isn't a salvation. It's the weapon the curse uses to destroy everything he touches. I'm telling you this because I like you. And I don't want to see what happened to Alara happen to you. Be careful." With that final, chilling warning, he left. Jane bolted the door behind him, her entire body trembling. The fragile, tentative trust she had started to build with Kyle shattered into a million pieces. A short while later, she saw his powerful silhouette returning from the woods. She watched him approach the cabin, no longer seeing a complicated protector. She now saw a monster, a killer, her fated mate, and she was locked inside his fortress with him. Chapter 10. The Blade's Edge. A thick, suffocating fog of suspicion had settled in the cabin, more blinding than the mist outside. Jane watched Cale with new eyes. Every move he made, every shadow that crossed his face, filtered through the chilling lens of Liam's story. He destroyed her. The words were a constant, poisonous whisper in her mind. Kyle wasn't oblivious. He felt her withdrawal, the way she flinched when he came too close. Her fear was a palpable thing between them, and to him, her fear was a liability. One morning, he slammed a heavy, sheathed knife onto the table in front of her. "You can't spend the rest of your life hiding behind me," he growled, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You need to know how to defend yourself. Today, your education begins." He led her outside, into a small clearing behind the cabin. The air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and pine. He showed her the basics: how to hold the knife, how to stand, how to use an attacker's weight against them. His instructions were terse, impatient, but teaching her required him to be close, too close. To correct her stance, he stood behind her, his hard chest pressing against her back, his arms coming around her to adjust her grip on the handle. Jane's breath caught in her throat. His body was a furnace against hers, and his scent, that intoxicating, wild mix of storm and forest, clouded her thoughts, making it hard to remember why she was so afraid of him. His hand closed over hers on the knife's hilt, his fingers strong and warm. A jolt, low and deep, shot through her. It was the bond, humming with a quiet, dangerous energy. "Your grip is wrong," he murmured, his breath a warm puff against her ear that sent a shiver down her spine. "You're holding it like a kitchen tool. This is a part of your arm, an extension of your will. It has one purpose: to end a threat." He guided her through a series of movements, his body moving in perfect, fluid sync with hers. For a terrifying, exhilarating moment, they were not protector and prisoner. They were partners in a deadly dance. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now tangled with something else. A thrilling, forbidden current of attraction. She could feel the raw power coiled in his muscles, the steady beat of his heart against her back. This man might be a monster, but he was a magnificent one. He spun her around to face him, demonstrating a block. "Never take your eyes off your enemy," he commanded, his own amber gaze burning into hers. They stood inches apart, the knife the only thing between them. The world seemed to shrink until it was only the space between their bodies, charged and electric. His eyes flickered down to her lips. The air grew thick, heavy. He leaned in slowly, the anger and impatience in his expression melting away, replaced by a raw, naked hunger. Jane's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the moment of truth. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to shove him away. He destroyed her. But she didn't move. She couldn't. She found herself leaning in, her eyes fluttering shut, craving the touch she knew could be her ruin. Then, with a choked-off snarl, he ripped himself away from her. He stumbled back as if she had physically burned him, his face a mask of self-loathing. "The lesson is over," he bit out, his back to her. The unresolved tension hung in the air, a silent, crackling thing, leaving Jane breathless and more dangerously confused than ever before. Chapter 11. A Legacy of Blood. The near kiss shattered the fragile peace of their cohabitation. Now, the cabin felt charged with a new, unspoken tension. Kyle avoided her, his moods darker than ever, while Jane was left grappling with her own traitorous desires. Liam's warning warred constantly with the memory of Cale's touch, his scent, the profound loneliness she'd glimpsed in his eyes. She needed answers. She needed the truth. And she had a feeling it was hiding behind the locked oak door at the end of the hall. That night, after Cale had left to hunt, Jane stood before the forbidden door. Armed with a hairpin from her bag and a healthy dose of defiance, she set to work on the ancient lock. It took several frustrating minutes, but with a final satisfying click, the mechanism gave way. The room was not a bedroom or a storage space. It was a study. A scholar's den dedicated to a single obsessive subject, the curse. Bookshelves overflowed with ancient, leather-bound tomes. Maps of old pack territories were pinned to the walls. But the centerpiece was a massive oak desk, its surface covered in genealogical charts, timelines, and handwritten notes. It was the research of a man desperately searching for a cure, or a key. Her eyes scanned the charts, tracing the lineage of Cale's family, the Blackwood Alphas. And then she saw it. On a separate chart, linked to his with a tangle of red thread, was another family line, her own, the Sinclairs. Her breath hitched. The lines converged generations ago, at the very point the curse was said to have originated. There, scrawled in Cale's aggressive handwriting, was a single chilling sentence. The Sinclair witch bound the curse. Only Sinclair blood can break it. "What do you think you're doing?" Cale's voice, cold and furious, sliced through the silence. Jane spun around. He stood in the doorway, his massive frame silhouetted against the hall light. His eyes were blazing with a dangerous golden fire. He wasn't just angry. He was devastated. She had breached his sanctuary. She had uncovered his most guarded secret. "My family," she whispered, her hand trembling as she pointed to the chart. "What does this mean?" He strode into the room, his rage seeming to suck the very air from it. He looked at the desk, at the evidence of his centuries-long obsession laid bare. The fury in his eyes slowly gave way to a weary, soul-deep resignation. The secret was out. "It means," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of generations, "that you are not some random victim of fate. Your presence here was not an accident." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw the full, crushing weight of his curse. "An ancestor of yours, a powerful witch named Isabella Sinclair, was betrayed by my ancestor. In her grief and rage, she forged the curse that has plagued my family for centuries. She created a poison that would forever deny the Blackwood Alphas their one true happiness." He paced the room, the terrible story pouring out of him. But she built in a key, a cruel final bit of irony. The curse was designed to seek out a mate from her own bloodline. It was designed to bring our families together again, only to end in tragedy. Because the only way to break the curse— He stopped, his back to her, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "The only way is for the Alpha to willingly sacrifice the life of his Sinclair mate on the night of the blood moon." The floor seemed to fall away beneath Jane's feet. She wasn't just a potential victim of the curse. She was its intended sacrifice. Her life wasn't just a risk. It was the price. Chapter 12. The Beast Within the Man. The revelation left Jane shattered, adrift in a new reality where her very existence was a ticking time bomb. Every look from Kyle was now layered with a terrible new meaning. He was the man fated to love her, and potentially the man fated to kill her. The trust she was starting to build had been replaced by a deep, numbing terror. He was no longer just her protector. He was her potential executioner. The attack came just after dawn, when the world was shrouded in a pearly gray light. It was not a scouting party this time. It was an assault. A rival alpha, a hulking, scarred shifter named Marcus, had come in force. The cabin's windows exploded inward, and the world dissolved into a chaos of snarling fur and violence. Cale roared, a sound of pure, primal fury. He moved to protect her, his body a living shield, but this time the fight was different. He wasn't just defending his territory, he was defending the key to his entire existence. He fought with a desperation she had never seen. a savage intensity that was terrifying to behold. He was a whirlwind of destruction, but they were too many. Marcus, a beast of a man with cold, calculating eyes, barked orders to his pack. "Keep him busy! Get the girl!" Two shifters broke through Cale's defenses, their eyes locked on Jane. She scrambled backward, the knife Cale had given her feeling like a useless toy in her hand. Cale saw them. A guttural, inhuman sound ripped from his throat. He threw one attacker aside and lunged to intercept the others, but another shifter slammed into him from the side, its claws digging deep into his shoulder. Cale screamed, a sound of both pain and unbound rage. And then, something inside him snapped. His body began to contort, his form flickering between man and something else. His skin stretched, his bones cracked and reformed. His eyes, once humanly intelligent, now burned with the feral, mindless light of a pure beast. The wolf, the true, unrestrained monster of the curse, was breaking free. He was losing control. Liam's warning echoed in her ears. He destroyed her. The monster that was once Cale threw back its head and let out a roar that was no longer human. It was the sound of the beast unleashed, and it turned its blazing eyes not on the enemy, but on everything. It was about to lose itself to a blood rage. In that moment, Jane faced a choice. She could run. She could try to save herself from the monster Liam had warned her about, the beast that had killed Ilara. Or she could trust the man who had trained her, who had shown her a brief glimpse of his profound loneliness. She didn't run. "Kyle!" she screamed, her voice cutting through the din of the fight. The beast paused, its head tilting at the sound. Its gaze, full of feral madness, landed on her. It took a half step in her direction, a low, warning snarl rumbling in its chest. Her heart was pounding, but she stood her ground. Slowly, she held out her hand. "Cale," she said again, her voice softer this time, filled with a desperate plea. "Come back. It's me. It's Jane." She took a shaky step toward him. The rival shifters watched, stunned by her insane bravery. She reached him, and with a trembling hand, she placed her palm flat against the center of his heaving chest. The skin was hot, his heart hammering like a war drum beneath her hand. He flinched, a deep growl shaking his entire frame. But he didn't attack. He looked down at her hand, then up at her face. For a fleeting moment, a flicker of recognition of the man he was returned to his eyes. He was fighting it, fighting to come back to her. And in that instant, seeing him teeter on the edge between man and monster, Jane's fear finally dissolved, replaced by a fierce, startling wave of possessiveness. He was not a monster to be feared. He was hers to save. Chapter 13. An Anchor in the Storm. The aftermath of the battle was a wreckage of splintered furniture and shattered glass. In the center of the chaos, Cale slowly regained his human form, his powerful body trembling with the strain of holding the beast at bay. He looked at Jane, and the expression in his eyes was not one of gratitude. It was one of pure, undiluted terror. He saw what she had done, how her presence, her touch, had pulled him back from the abyss, and it horrified him. "You saw it," he rasped, his voice raw and broken. He took a staggering step away from her, as if her very presence was a physical pain. "The monster. That is what the curse does. That is what I will become. You should have run." "There was nowhere to run," Jane countered, her own voice shaking but firm. She was done with fear. Seeing him on that precipice, so close to being lost forever, had burned the fear out of her, leaving behind a hard, crystalline resolve. "Then you should have let it take me," he roared, his anguish echoing in the ruined room. "My life is forfeit. Yours is not. I've told you what your blood means, what this curse demands. As long as you are here, you are a walking sacrifice. Now, for the last time, I get out. Go now, while you still can." This was it, the final push, his last, desperate attempt to save her by rejecting her. But something inside Jane had fundamentally shifted. She had spent the last several weeks being a victim of Mark's betrayal, a victim of the shifter's attacks, a victim of a centuries-old curse. She was tired of being a pawn in someone else's story. No. The single word hung in the air, quiet but unshakable. Cale stared at her, his golden eyes wide with disbelief. "Running is what I came here to do," she continued, her voice gaining strength with every word. "I ran from my old life. I tried to run from you. I've been running from everything that hurts. But I'm done running." She took a step toward him, into his space, forcing him to meet her gaze. "You told me my life is the key. You told me my blood is the price to break this curse. Well, if my life is at the center of this, then I deserve a say in what happens to it." She saw the battle raging within him, his instinct to protect her warring with the undeniable truth in her words. "I am not your weakness, Cale," she said, her voice dropping, becoming fierce and possessive. "I am not a sacrifice waiting to happen. I am your anchor. You were lost and I pulled you back. That has to mean something." She saw the walls of his resolve begin to crack. He had spent his entire life isolated, fighting this curse alone. The idea of an ally, of an anchor, was a concept so foreign, so dangerous, yet so desperately wanted. "I'm staying," she declared, leaving no room for argument. "I'm staying, and I'm fighting. You will not face Marcus alone. You will not face this curse alone. Not anymore." He stared at her for a long, silent moment, his expression a storm of conflicting emotions. Finally, with a barely perceptible nod, he relented. He didn't accept her as a mate. He didn't accept her as a lover. But in that moment, in the ruins of his home, he accepted her as a partner in his war. It was a fragile, terrifying, and unbreakable pact, and it was a point of no return for them both. Chapter 14. The fire between the new alliance forged in the wreckage of the battle changed the very air in the cabin. The dynamic was no longer protector and prisoner, or monster and victim. They were equals, soldiers in the same war, and this new parity created a different kind of tension. They spent the day cleaning up the debris, moving with a synchronized, unspoken understanding. Every accidental brush of his hand against hers, every shared glance, sent a jolt of awareness through Jane's body. As night fell, the bond, no longer suppressed by her fear or his rejection, began to awaken. It started as a low, warm hum deep in her chest, a quiet pull in his direction. But as the hours passed, the hum grew into a thrum, a palpable physical need that was impossible to ignore. It was a craving that went beyond simple attraction. It was a deep, primal calling of one soul to another, a magnetic force that made being in separate rooms feel like a physical torment. Jane lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, her body aching with a strange, unfamiliar longing. Every nerve ending was on fire, aware of him in the room down the hall. She could feel his restlessness as if it were her own. It was too much. The bond was demanding, insistent. Giving up the pretense of sleep, she padded silently down the hall and found him standing by the window, staring out into the moonlit darkness, his body rigid with tension. He knew she was there without turning. "You feel it too," he stated, his voice a strained whisper. "I can't," she began, unable to find the words. "It's like I'm being pulled apart." He turned slowly, and the raw, unbridled desire in his eyes stole the breath from her lungs. The careful control he maintained was gone, stripped away by the raw power of their connection. "It wants to be whole," he rasped. "It's been denied for too long." In 2 long strides he was in front of her. He didn't touch her, but the heat radiating from his body was a caress in itself. "This is a mistake," he breathed, his voice a guttural plea. "I know," she whispered back. His hand came up, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. His touch was electric, 1,000 tiny explosions of light against her skin. She leaned into his palm, a soft, involuntary sigh escaping her lips. That was all it took. With a low growl that was equal parts frustration and surrender, his mouth crashed down on hers. The kiss was not gentle. It was a desperate, hungry collision, a release of all the pent-up tension, fear, and longing that had been simmering between them. Jane wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, meeting his fervor with her own. It was a kiss of desperation, of two broken souls finding a temporary solace in a storm. He lifted her effortlessly, her legs wrapping around his waist as he pressed her back against the cold wall. His lips left hers to trail a burning path down her neck, toward the sensitive skin where her pulse hammered. Jane arched her back, her head falling back in surrender. This was it. The claiming. The moment he would bite. The moment he would mark her and seal their fates together, for better or for worse. The world narrowed to the feel of his lips on her skin, the promise of the glorious, terrible finality. A long, mournful howl echoed from the distance. The sound shattered the spell. Cale froze, his body going rigid. The howl was a signal, a returning patrol, duty, danger. The world rushed back in, cold and harsh. He pulled back, his breathing ragged, his eyes a mixture of burning desire and profound self-loathing. The interruption left them both trembling, aching with an unfulfilled need that was a sharper pain than any physical wound. The bond screamed in protest, denied at the very last second. Chapter 15. The Serpent's Smile. In the tense light of morning, the memory of their near-claiming hung between them, a shimmering, unspoken thing. Cale was a storm of brooding silence, his anger clearly directed at his own lack of control. Jane felt a strange mix of frustration and a deep, humming satisfaction. He wanted her. Even with the curse hanging over their heads, his desire for her was as real and undeniable as her own. Liam arrived mid-morning, his expression a perfect mask of concerned loyalty. He nodded to Jane with a warm, respectful smile, before turning his attention to Cale. "Marcus's pack has pulled back to the northern ridge," he reported, his voice crisp and professional. "They're licking their wounds, but they're not gone. They're watching, waiting." "Let them wait," Cale growled, his gaze fixed on the forest outside the window. "They tested our defenses and found them wanting. We need to reinforce the perimeter." "Agreed," Liam said smoothly. "You look exhausted, Alpha. You should rest. I can take the first watch, organize the patrols." Cale hesitated for a moment, then nodded curtly. "Fine. Report back in 2 hours." He gave Jane a long, unreadable look before heading upstairs, the weight of command and his inner turmoil visible in every line of his body. With Cale gone, Liam turned to Jane, his demeanor softening. "That was brave, what you did during the fight," he said, his voice full of admiration. "You have a power over him, a way of calming the beast. He's never had an anchor like you before." "I'm not sure I did anything," Jane deflected, uncomfortable with the praise. "You did everything," Liam insisted, his gaze intense. "But you must understand the burden you've taken on. You saw how close he came to the edge. He needs you to be his strength, but that is a dangerous, exhausting role to play, especially when the curse is fighting you every step of the way." His words were like silken threads, weaving a narrative of her as the sole, fragile pillar holding back a monstrous tide. He was praising her while simultaneously reinforcing the idea that Cale was an unstable monster. After a few more minutes of seemingly supportive conversation, Liam excused himself to begin his patrol. Jane watched him go, feeling a strange sense of unease. His concern felt practiced, almost too perfect. Shaking her head, she dismissed the thought as paranoia. But miles away, at the cold, wind-swept northern ridge, Liam's kind smile was gone. He moved through the trees until he came face to face with the hulking, scarred form of Marcus. "He's pulled back into his shell," Liam reported, his voice devoid of its earlier warmth. "The girl has a stronger hold on him than I anticipated. She pulled him back from a full transformation." Marcus let out a low, dangerous laugh. A human anchor. How pathetic. Does she suspect you? Not at all, Liam said with a confident smirk. She thinks I'm her concerned friend. She's drinking every bit of poison I feed her, growing more uncertain of him by the day. Good, Marcus grunted. Your plan is slow, but it's working. You keep weakening their bond from the inside with your lies. I'll keep applying pressure from the outside. Sooner or later, the great alpha Kale will snap. He will become the beast we all know he is, and his own pack will beg me to put him down. And I'll be there to hand you the crown, Liam finished, his eyes gleaming with a cold, treacherous ambition. Just remember our deal, Marcus. When he falls, the girl is mine. Chapter 16. The trap is sprung. A fragile, dangerous peace had settled in the cabin. The unspoken desire that had nearly consumed them the night before now simmered beneath every shared glance, every accidental touch. Kale was a storm of conflicted energy, his protective instincts at war with the curse that demanded he push Jane away. The pack was on high alert, the perimeter patrols doubled. It felt like the calm before a final, devastating storm. The breach came from within. Liam arrived just after noon, his expression grim. Marcus's pack is making a move on the western ridge, he reported to Kale, his voice tight with urgency. It's a small group, but they're testing the border, trying to draw us out. Kale's eyes narrowed. It's a feint. I agree, Liam said, his gaze steady. But we can't ignore it. It's a sign of disrespect. We have to show them this is our territory. I'll go, Kale growled. You stay here. Guard her. He looked at Jane, a silent command passing between them. Stay inside. Bolt the door. Jane's stomach twisted into a cold knot. Something felt wrong. The timing was too perfect, Liam's urgency a little too sharp. But Kale was already gone, a dark shadow melting into the dense forest, his loyalty to his pack and his territory demanding his attention. Liam turned to Jane, his face a mask of reassurance. Don't worry. He'll be fine. He's the strongest alpha these mountains have ever seen. He offered her a kind, disarming smile. I'm just going to check the cabin's outer defenses, make sure everything is secure. He walked outside. Jane bolted the door as instructed, her ear pressed against the wood. She heard Liam's footsteps circling the cabin. Then she heard a low, metallic click, a strange whirring sound, and then silence. A heavy, expectant quiet that was far more terrifying than any noise. The wards. He had disabled Kale's protective wards. Before she could even process the betrayal, the front door exploded inward. Marcus stood there, a cruel, triumphant smirk on his scarred face. He was flanked by his most brutal enforcers. There was no fight this time. There was no chance. They swarmed her, their hands grabbing, pulling. Jane fought back with a feral desperation, using the lessons Kale had taught her. She sank the knife he'd given her into one shifter's thigh, but she was overwhelmed, her strength no match for theirs. Marcus grabbed her by the hair, yanking her head back. Such a little fighter, he sneered. I can see why he's so taken with you. They dragged her out of the cabin and into the woods. In the distance, a furious, heart-stopping roar echoed through the trees. Kale. He knew. He was coming. A desperate hope surged through Jane, but it was quickly extinguished. He was too far away. The trap had been perfectly sprung. He burst into the clearing just as they reached the edge of the territory, a force of pure, untamed rage. He launched himself at them, but they were ready. It was an ambush. He fought like a cornered god, his power immense, but they swarmed him, their only goal to injure and delay. The last thing Jane saw before she was dragged into the shadows was Kale, brought to one knee, a deep gash bleeding freely from his side. His head was thrown back and he let out a howl not of fury, but of pure, soul-shattering despair. The sound tore through her, a physical wound inflicted by their bond, a testament to their forced, brutal separation. Chapter 17. The price of blood. Jane's prison was not a cold, damp dungeon. It was a gilded cage. Marcus had locked her in a lavishly decorated room in his own stronghold, a place with silk sheets and barred windows. The comfort was a deliberate cruelty, a mockery of her captivity. She had paced the room for hours, the phantom pain from the severed bond a constant, sickening ache in her gut. She could feel Cale's agony, his rage, his despair, all of it a muted, fuzzy echo from miles away. The door opened and Marcus entered, carrying a tray of food she had no intention of eating. He didn't look like a savage warlord. He looked like a calculating CEO, his movements calm and controlled. "You must be hungry," he said, his voice a smooth, dangerous purr. "What do you want from me?" Jane demanded, her own voice hoarse. "From you?" "Nothing at all," he replied, setting the tray down. "You are simply a key. A very beautiful, very valuable key." He sat in a chair opposite the bed, regarding her with an unnerving, analytical gaze. "Liam tells me Cale shared his little curse theory with you, that your life is the key to his salvation. So much drama, so much angst." He leaned forward, his eyes glinting with a cruel amusement. "He's so close to the truth, yet so far away. He believes your sacrifice is a choice, an act of love and will on the blood moon. It's romantic, I'll give him that. But the ancient magic that binds him is not romantic. It is literal. It is bloodthirsty." A cold dread, heavier than any she had yet felt, began to seep into Jane's bones. "Cale's research was incomplete," Marcus continued, clearly savoring the moment. "He found the passages about the Sinclair bloodline, about the sacrifice, but he missed the fine print. The prophecy doesn't say the alpha can sacrifice his mate to break the curse. The prophecy states that for the curse to be broken, the Sinclair mate must die." The words hit her like a physical blow. "No." "Oh, yes," Marcus hissed, his civility evaporating, revealing the snake beneath. "It's not a choice. It's not a romantic sacrifice. It is the price. Her last breath for his freedom. There is no version of this story where you both walk away into the sunset. The curse was designed by your ancestor to give his ancestor the most painful, impossible choice imaginable: remain a monster forever or become a murderer to be free." He stood up and walked to the door, his victory absolute. "You see, your little act of bravery, your choice to stay and fight, you weren't choosing to be his partner. You were just choosing the manner of your own execution." The door clicked shut, leaving Jane alone in the suffocating silence, the last vestiges of her hope crumbling into dust. Her fate was sealed. She was already dead. She was... Chapter 18. To love a monster. Despair was a cold, heavy blanket. Jane sat on the silk sheets of her prison, the reality of her situation crushing her. There was no escape, no clever plan, no heroic rescue. The story only had one ending, and it was hers. Her sacrifice wasn't a choice, it was a cosmic bill come due. Cale would either remain cursed, or he would become a killer. She was trapped in a tragedy centuries in the making. A faint scratching sound from the window broke the silence. She looked up, her heart giving a painful lurch. Kyle was there, clinging to the stone wall outside her window, 3 stories up. He was a wreck. His face was pale and drawn, his clothes were torn, and the wound in his side was bleeding sluggishly through a makeshift bandage. He looked battered, exhausted, and utterly broken. He pried one of the bars loose with a final, desperate grunt, the metal groaning in protest. He slipped through the gap and landed silently in her room. He wasn't there as a conquering hero. He was a ghost, haunted and defeated. "Kyle," she breathed, rushing to his side. "You're hurt. You shouldn't be here." "There's nowhere else I could be," he rasped, his hand coming up to cup her face, his touch both a comfort and an agony. He looked into her eyes, and she saw the full, undiluted despair of his soul. "I can't get you out of here, Jane. Not like this. His fortress is too well guarded, and my pack is broken." Liam's betrayal split them down the middle. He leaned his forehead against hers, his body trembling with the effort of standing. "But I can still save you," he whispered, his voice cracking. Jane's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" "Marcus will make a trade," he said, his words a torrent of pained desperation. "Me for you. If I surrender myself and my territory, he'll let you go. He'll give you safe passage off this mountain. You can have your life back. You can be free." She stared at him, horrified. "And what happens to you? He'll kill you." "Let him," Kyle choked out, a tear finally tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. "My life has been a cage since the day I was born. This curse. Let me die with it. Let me die knowing that you are alive, that you are safe. That is a better end than I ever deserved." This was it. The absolute darkest moment. He was not the monster Liam had painted him to be. He was not the killer from Marcus's stories. He was a man, so deeply in love, that he would choose an eternity of damnation and a brutal death just for the chance of her survival. He was willing to sacrifice everything, his pack, his life, his very soul, for her. And as Jane looked at this bloodied, broken man begging her to let him die for her, she felt a terrible, profound clarity. Her own despair dissolved, replaced by a love so fierce and so absolute it was a physical pain in her chest. She finally understood. She would rather face 1,000 curses, 1,000 deaths by his side, than live a single hollow day in a world without him. Chapter 19. A Vow of Fire. Cale's plea for his own death hung in the cold air of the cell, a testament to his profound love and his absolute despair. Jane looked at the magnificent broken man before her, and the last of her fear burned away, leaving behind a core of pure, unshakable certainty. The despair he felt. She would not let it be his end. She would not let it be their end. She reached out, her fingers gently touching the tear track on his grimy cheek. "No," she whispered, her voice a soft but unbreakable vow. He looked at her, his golden eyes clouded with confusion. "Jane, you don't understand. This is the only way." "You're wrong," she said, her voice gaining a strength that surprised them both. "You think your life is a cage? My life before I came here was a different kind of prison. A pretty comfortable cell made of lies and expectations. I ran away from it, hoping to find freedom in being alone." She took a steadying breath, her gaze never leaving his. "But I was wrong. Freedom isn't being alone. Freedom is choosing what you fight for, who you fight for." She gripped the front of his torn shirt, her knuckles pressing against his chest. "You don't get to make this choice for me. You don't get to decide that my life is more valuable than yours. My life is mine, and I am choosing to be here. With you. If the curse wants a sacrifice, then it will have to come and take me, but I am not going to be a willing victim, and I am certainly not going to let you be one either." Hope, a fragile, dangerous flicker, ignited in the depths of his eyes. "But we're trapped. There's no way out." "That's where you're wrong again," she said, a hint of a wry smile touching her lips for the first time in days. "Marcus thinks he's clever, putting me in a comfortable room. But comfort makes the guards lazy." She glanced at the window he'd just broken into. "The patrol on this side of the stronghold is thin. They check the main gate every hour, but this wall, only every 2. I've been watching, listening. There's a blind spot near the southern parapet." He stared at her, a look of dawning awe on his face. She was no longer a victim to be protected. She was a strategist, a partner. The anchor he never knew he needed was now showing him the way out of the storm. "Love isn't about finding safety, Kyle," she said, her voice dropping to an intense, earnest whisper. "I thought it was, but it's not. It's about finding the one person you're willing to sacrifice everything for." She saw the truth of her words land, saw them rebuild the hope that had been shattered within him. You were willing to do that for me. Now it's my turn." He searched her face, looking for any hint of doubt, but found only a fierce, burning resolve. The despair that had clung to him like a shroud began to recede, replaced by the warrior, the alpha, the king who had been brought to his knees but was not yet defeated. He nodded slowly, a silent agreement passing between them. "The southern parapet," he rasped, his voice regaining a sliver of its former strength. She had given him back his will to fight, not for his own life, not even for his pack, but for the impossible, unthinkable future she was offering him. Together they turned to the broken window, no longer prisoners fleeing a sentence, but two determined souls escaping to start a war. The final battle was not just for their lives, it was for their right to choose their own fate. Chapter 20. The Gathering of Wolves. The escape from the stronghold was a tense, heart-pounding affair. They moved through the shadows like ghosts, Jane's knowledge of the patrol routes and Cale's supernatural senses guiding them through the darkness. The bond between them was a silent, humming line of communication, a shared awareness that allowed them to move as one. When they finally slipped past the outer wall and melted into the familiar, protective embrace of the deep woods, the sense of relief was so profound it was dizzying. But they were not safe. They were two wounded shifters in enemy territory, with a broken pack scattered to the winds. Kyle led them to a hidden network of caves deep in the mountains, a place his enemies would never find. He placed 2 fingers in his mouth and let out a low, warbling cry, a sound that was more bird than wolf. It was a call Jane had never heard before, a summons laced with a specific, urgent note. Then, they waited. They didn't have to wait long. The first to arrive were 2 young shifters, their faces a mixture of relief and fury. Then came more, in 2s and 3s, materializing from the shadows. They were the loyalists, the ones who had refused to bow to Marcus or follow a traitor like Liam. Soon, the main cavern was filled with the grim, determined faces of nearly 20 pack members. An older female shifter, her fur streaked with gray, stepped forward. Her name was Alara's mother, though she did not speak it. Her eyes, filled with a sharp, ancient wisdom, assessed Jane from head to toe. There was a murmur among the pack, some looking at Jane with suspicion, seeing her as the source of all their recent troubles. "The human is the cause of this," one shifter growled, his hand resting on the hilt of a knife. "Liam's betrayal, Marcus's attack. It all started when she arrived." Before Cale could let out a warning snarl, the old she-wolf held up a hand. "I saw my own daughter consumed by the curse," she said, her voice silencing the cavern. "I saw her destroyed by our alpha's solitary despair. He tried to bear the burden alone, and that isolation is what gave the curse its power." She turned her piercing gaze back to Jane. "But this one," she did not run. She went into the heart of the storm and pulled him back from the brink. She is not the cause of his weakness. She is the source of a new strength our alpha has never known. She looked at Kyle. "You are stronger with her at your side. We all are." A wave of assent rippled through the loyal pack members. The doubt was gone, replaced by a unified resolve. They had their alpha back, and they had a new, unexpected ally. Cale stood before them, his wounds forgotten, his power and authority returning with every breath. He was no longer a broken man. He was a king reclaiming his throne. "Liam's treachery has cost us," he announced, his voice ringing with command. "Marcus believes he has won. He believes we are shattered. He is holding our home, our territory, and he is preparing for the blood moon, which is now only 2 nights away." He locked eyes with every member of his pack. "We will not wait for him. We will not hide in the shadows. We will remind him what happens when you corner a wolf." He drew a long, wicked-looking blade, its edge gleaming in the torchlight. "We take back our home. We take back our future. At dawn, we attack." Chapter 21. The Quiet Before the Dawn. The hours before the assault were a strange, suspended period of calm. The air in the caves hummed with a quiet, focused energy. Weapons were being sharpened, plans were being finalized, and silent prayers were being offered to ancient gods. Jane moved among the pack, helping where she could, bandaging minor wounds, offering words of encouragement. She was no longer an outsider. She was a part of this fierce, loyal family, bound to them by a shared cause. She found Cale standing alone at the mouth of the cave, looking out at the star-dusted sky. The moon was a sliver of silver, a pale ghost of the full, blood-red orb it would soon become. She came to stand beside him, their shoulders brushing. For a long time, they stood in a comfortable silence, the unspoken understanding between them more powerful than any words. "Are you scared?" he asked, his voice a low murmur that was almost lost in the whisper of the wind. "Terrified," she admitted without hesitation. "But not of dying." She turned to look at him, at his strong, handsome profile outlined by the faint moonlight. "I'm scared of failing you." He turned to face her, his amber eyes soft and full of an emotion so profound it made her heart ache. "You could never fail me, Jane." He reached out, his calloused thumb gently stroking her cheek. "Before you came, I was just waiting for the end. I had accepted my fate. My life was a long, dark hallway with no doors." He looked down at their feet, then back up at her, his gaze intense. "Then you burst in. You kicked down the walls. You brought the sun with you." He gave a small, sad smile. "I never believed I deserved a future. I never even allowed myself to want one. You make me want one." Tears welled in her eyes, hot and immediate. This was his confession. Not a declaration of love, but something far deeper, far more meaningful. It was an admission of hope. "Then let's go take it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. It was not a passionate kiss like before, but a gesture of pure, unadulterated intimacy. A meeting of souls. "The things I feel for you," he breathed, his voice ragged. "They're more powerful than any curse. After this is over, if we survive this." "When we survive this," she corrected him fiercely. He pulled back slightly, a flicker of a true, genuine smile gracing his lips. "When we survive this," he agreed. He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers, a perfect, solid fit. It was a promise of everything that lay on the other side of the battle to come. They stood there together, hand in hand, watching as the first, faint hint of gray began to lighten the eastern sky. The quiet was over. The dawn was coming. From the cavern behind them, a single, powerful wolf let out a low, guttural cry. The signal. It was time. Kyle squeezed her hand once, a final, silent vow, and then turned to lead his pack into the fight for their future. Chapter 22. The Blood Moon's Choice. The assault on the stronghold was a blur of controlled chaos. Cale's loyal pack fought with the righteous fury of those taking back their home, their howls of war echoing off the stone walls. Jane stayed close to Cale, not as a liability to be protected, but as a second pair of eyes, a strategist calling out enemy positions she'd memorized during her captivity. She was the anchor, and her calm resolve kept him grounded, his fighting focused and lethally precise. They found Marcus in the main throne room, a chamber of cold stone and arrogant power. Liam stood beside him, his face a twisted mask of ambition and greed. The traitor. "Cale!" Marcus boomed, a smug grin on his face. "You've come to surrender your territory? A wise choice." "I've come to take out the trash," Cale snarled, his eyes burning gold fixed on Liam. The sense of betrayal that rolled off him was a palpable wave of energy. The final battle was not a chaotic brawl, but a series of brutal, deadly clashes. Cale's pack engaged Marcus's guards while Cale himself launched toward the usurper. Liam moved to intercept him, his knife flashing. But he was met by the old she-wolf, her eyes blazing with the fury of a matriarch avenging her pack's honor. Their fight was swift and personal. Kale and Marcus crashed together like two primal forces, a whirlwind of claws and fury. It was a fight between two alphas, a battle for dominance, for the future of the territory. But Kale fought with something Marcus did not have. He fought with the strength of a true, recognized bond. He fought for the future Jane had made him believe in. With a final, definitive roar, Kale overwhelmed his rival, bringing him to his knees. The fight was over. His pack was victorious. But as Kale stood heaving over his defeated enemy, a sinister crimson light began to flood the room through the high windows. The blood moon was rising. A wave of agony hit Kale so hard he cried out, stumbling back. Dark, ethereal tendrils of energy seemed to writhe around him, the curse sensing its final opportunity. It was now or never. Jane walked forward into the center of the room, her heart pounding, but her steps steady. "Do it," she said, her voice clear and strong in the sudden silence. Kyle looked at her, his face a mask of horror. "No, Jane, no. The curse needs its price," she insisted, her gaze unwavering. "You know the prophecy. My life is the key. Let this be my choice. Let me give you your freedom." "Never," he choked out, staggering toward her. "I would rather live 1,000 lifetimes as a monster than a single second in a world without you. I will not be your killer." This was it, the final, terrible choice. He would let the curse consume him rather than harm her. She saw the absolute, selfless love in his eyes, and it gave her the strength for her final gambit. She would not let his love be his damnation. She stepped up to him, her hands coming up to cup his face. "Then don't be my killer," she whispered, her voice trembling with the force of her conviction. She tilted her head to the side, baring the pale, vulnerable skin of her neck. "Be my mate." His eyes widened, the beast and the man warring within him. "Claim me," she commanded, her voice ringing with love and defiance. "Forget the prophecy. Forget the curse. Choose me. Claim me anyway, and let the damned consequences come." With a roar that was both a sob and a declaration of love, he surged forward. His fangs descended, and a searing, brilliant agony exploded in her neck. The world dissolved into a blinding white light. Chapter 23. The Shards of a Curse. The light faded. Jane lay on the cold stone floor, the echo of pain a distant, fading hum. She felt whole. Not just whole, but more alive than she had ever been, every cell in her body singing with a vibrant, golden energy. The bite on her neck was not a wound. It was a warm, tingling brand, a source of incredible power. The bond between her and Kale was no longer a fragile, aching thread. It was a brilliant, unbreakable river of light, flooding her with his emotions, his shock, his terror, and a dawning, incredulous wave of pure, unadulterated relief. Kale collapsed beside her, not from injury, but from a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. He shuddered violently, his body convulsing as centuries of dark parasitic magic were violently purged from his bloodline. It was like watching a man who had carried a mountain on his back, his entire life finally be allowed to set it down. He pushed himself up on one elbow, his breathing ragged. He looked at her, his eyes wide. The amber was still there, a warm, beautiful gold, but the haunted, tormented shadow that had always lurked in their depths was gone. He was free. "You're alive," he breathed, the words a prayer. He reached out, his trembling fingers tracing the mark on her neck, a perfect swirling tattoo of their bond. "You're alive." Jane sat up, a slow, radiant smile spreading across her face. "The prophecy was a riddle," she whispered, the truth settling into her with a sense of absolute clarity. It wasn't about a sacrifice of death. It was about a sacrifice of will. It needed a mate from my bloodline who was willing to die for the alpha, and an alpha who was willing to remain cursed for his mate. It was about a love so absolute that it defied the very terms of the curse. Their choices, Their mutual willingness to sacrifice everything for each other had been the true key. Their love hadn't just fulfilled the prophecy, it had shattered it. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. His body shook with silent, racking sobs of a man who had just been released from a life sentence. Jane held him tightly, her own tears of relief streaming down her face. They clung to each other amidst the wreckage and the stunned silence of their pack, two souls who had walked through the darkest hell and had somehow impossibly found their way out into the light. The war was over. The curse was broken. All that was left was the raw, quiet, and breathtaking intimacy of a future they had never thought they would have. They didn't need words. There was only the solid feel of his arms around her, the steady beat of his heart against hers, and the overwhelming, peaceful certainty that they were finally, truly home. Chapter 24. A Home in the Wild. 2 weeks later, the stronghold was no longer a place of darkness and betrayal. It was a home, filled with the sounds of a healing pack. The remnants of Marcus's followers had scattered to the winds, and Liam's treachery had earned him a sentence of exile, a fate many considered worse than death in the unforgiving wilderness. The blood moon had passed, leaving behind clear, star-filled skies. Cale gathered his entire pack in the Great Hall, the same room where their final battle had been fought. But tonight the air was not thick with the scent of blood, but with the smell of roasting meat and wood smoke from the hearth. Kyle stood before them, no longer a haunted, solitary figure, but a confident, powerful alpha. Jane stood proudly at his side, his hand holding hers. The claiming mark on her neck was a beautiful, intricate silver pattern against her skin, a symbol not of a curse, but of a love that had conquered one. For centuries, our pack has lived in the shadow of a curse, Cale announced, his voice ringing with a newfound warmth. That shadow is gone. We are free. He turned to Jane, his golden eyes soft with an emotion so deep it was breathtaking. This is Jane, my mate, my anchor, the one who brought the dawn. She is not just my heart. She is the heart of this pack. She is your Luna. A unified, joyous howl rose from the gathered shifters, a powerful, rumbling chorus of acceptance and respect that shook the very rafters. It was a welcome. It was a vow of fealty. Jane smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile, and leaned her head against Cale's shoulder, feeling the vibration of his own happy growl in his chest. Later, they stood on the high balcony overlooking the vast, moon-drenched forest. The wilderness that had once seemed so menacing now felt like a peaceful, sleeping kingdom. His kingdom. Their kingdom. "Do you miss it?" Cale asked softly, his arms wrapped around her from behind. "The city? Your old life?" Jane thought of the sterile apartment, the false friendships, the hollow ache of betrayal. It all felt like a lifetime ago, a story about someone else. "I came here to run away," she confessed, her voice a quiet murmur. "I thought love was a cage. I thought surrendering to someone else meant losing yourself." She leaned back into his solid, warm embrace, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart against her back. "I spent my whole life building walls to keep myself safe, and all it did was make me a prisoner." She turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to cup his jaw. "It wasn't until I came here, until I met a cursed, grumpy alpha in the woods, that I learned what real freedom is." He looked down at her, his love for her shining in his eyes. "It's this," she whispered, rising on her toes to press a soft, loving kiss to his lips. "It's choosing to fight for something. It's surrendering completely to one person and finding out you've become stronger than you ever were alone." He kissed her back, a deep, tender kiss full of promises for all the dawns yet to come. She had come to the forest seeking solitude, but in the heart of the wild, she had found her home.